It's Monday night, and you know what that means. Jersey First brings to you the latest edition of Real Talk, and I am New Jersey's premier award-winning journalist, top 100 Latino via the Latino Spirit Online magazine for 2020, 2021, and 2022, as well as being your favorite conservative, Fernando Uribe. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend, folks. Happy May to everyone. I'm very excited. It's my birthday month. Yes, I'm a Taurus. Yes, folks, the most principled and perhaps the easiest of people to get along with. Yes. So a shout out to all my fellow Taurians this month as we obviously will be celebrating birthdays. Great start to the month, obviously. Some nice weather over the weekend, especially in Hoboken. Got to, attend the Hoboken Arts and Crafts Festival, which was pretty exciting. Got to talk to some people, some vendors, some great artists there. For those of you that follow me on Instagram and Facebook, of course, I know many of you enjoyed my shirt I was wearing yesterday, and so did a lot of people in attendance. I got a lot of positive feedback for my t-shirt yesterday. So what else is new, folks, in today's political climate? But of course, I want to thank you all for tuning in from wherever and however you may be doing so right now on Facebook Live via StreamYard and also on the Jersey First YouTube page. Make sure you check out Jersey First at their website, www.jerseyfirst.org. That's jersey1st.org. And also make sure you like them on Facebook and follow them on both Instagram and Twitter. And for all my fellow baseball fans out there, ladies and gentlemen, of course, fellow Yankee fans, nice to see our Yankees in first place. Let me have a little victory tea for everybody here. Hold on. 9 in a row for the team that runs New York. I know it's a little difficult to accept for people that live in Queens, right, or root for the New York Mets. But yes, nice to see the Yankees on a hot start to the season, of course. Folks, I have a lot to talk about later at the closing of the show in terms of who's guilty of bad journalism in New Jersey this week. I think you definitely want to tune in for that one. But first, I'll bring the exclusives that nobody else does in New Jersey media. And certainly it's always here on Real Talk via Jersey First. Joining me tonight, she is the president of the New Jersey chapter of the National Organization for Women and arguably New Jersey's most visible feminist. She is Anjali Mehrotra, and she joins us here tonight on Real Talk. Anjali, how are you?
Hi, Fernando. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And again, I applaud it because, I like to interview everybody. Anjali, people on the left, people on the right, people in the center. That's how we learn. That's how we engage each other by conversations, right? It's not about canceling each other or vilifying people. It's about talking, and I'm looking forward to that today. Before we get to sort of policy and more political talk, you are a native of India. I know you immigrated here at a very young age. You attended the Stevens Institute of Technology right down the road from me in Hudson County. Tell us a little bit about that experience in immigrating here to the United States.
So as you mentioned, I grew up and I was raised in India, and I came here to go to college. I think as a young person, it's an adventure, right? You're looking forward, you're coming, I came without family on my own. So I don't think you're really looking at, anything else. Now looking back, I do recognize it was a difficult transition in some ways. When we talk about, for example, things like privilege, right? Like I came from a country where everybody looked like me. I had all the advantages to a society where basically I had to relearn everything. I mean, I was fortunate that I was very well versed in the language. Like I did grow up bilingual. But other than that, in terms of systems, in terms of pretty much everything. Like I had never used a laundry machine before, like all of those things I had to kind of learn. Thankfully to my roommates and my college mates who sort of walked me through that, I was able to handle that. So I think it's difficult. No, people don't really realize how difficult it is often for young people when they come to college from a foreign country. I had a great experience at Stevens. I did my bachelor's there and my master's. I met my husband there. And then we decided to stay on. We both got jobs. Initially, we lived in Hoboken for several years before we moved out to Union County.
Very nice. And again, listen, being a child of immigrants, I understand completely the struggle. My parents came here in their teenage years, really in the formative years. I know my mother left communism in Cuba in her late teens, and my dad left Colombia, a pretty bad economy, again, in his early 20s. So I understand the struggle and plight of immigrants because I'm the son of one. So again, I appreciate the experience, and I certainly applaud immigrants everywhere because it's a hard struggle. Okay. I was born here. I didn't have to leave anywhere. I have to, I'm also bilingual. I was raised that way. But again, when we see the struggles of immigrants, obviously from our parents or even our grandparents, it's something that's definitely very admirable. So, Anjali, let's get to some politics here. And one of the reasons I want to get you on the show is obviously I know you're a columnist at Insider NJ, and I always tend to have my thoughts about Insider NJ on a pretty frequent basis. If for everyone at home who watches me, you're one of the columnists I can actually stomach at Insider. Okay, I can't say the same for Maxie or Little JJ, but you, Alan Steinberg, even Fred Snowflake. Shout out to them because they've been on this show as well. You guys are bearable. I can say that much. So I'm always interested in reading. And your most recent column was titled "Why so afraid of sex education?" with a question mark. And I'll just read some excerpts here to our audience. Many students shared experiences when they felt targeted for their race, ethnicity, gender identity, and sexuality. In the world of middle schools and high schools, where social acceptance can play a formative role, artificial gender norms and stereotypes cause a lot of harm. The male student who is not into sports can be easily labeled as gay. So can the female student who does not wear dresses or makeup. This can lead to a lifetime of self-confidence or worse. After all, New Jersey is a state where Tyler Clemente found himself on the receiving end of harassment simply because he was gay. And I remember that story. I remember that was an unfortunate in 2010 at my alma mater at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Tyler Clemente, unfortunately, being outed by his roommate, just had a chilling effect where he drove up from New Brunswick in the middle of the night and he jumped to his death from the George Washington Bridge. So it's a tragic story about Tyler Clemente. I've talked about it on this show as well. And here's a line that really, really caught my attention. We must do a better job of teaching our young students tolerance. We must instill in them a respect for differences from a young age, break down stereotypes, and normalize sexuality and gender differences. That's what New Jersey's LGBTQ plus diversity, sex education, and now AAPI curriculum seeks to accomplish. Anjali, I think we've been doing that for a long time. I mean, obviously, for as long as I can remember, and I think I'm older than you. I remember learning in elementary school, even in middle school, differences when it came to students that were not the same as me, for example, right? Whether they were gay or anything else. And I think that's curriculum or at least messages that get ingrained in our subconscious at a very young age. So, when we talk about the curriculum that's under the microscope and that's very controversial, I've talked about this. I had Matt Friedman on from Politico a few weeks ago on this show. We had a really good exchange about it. Like, my issue is not just like Black History Month or Hispanic History Month. Like, my concern is not about, learning about Harvey Milk. Yes, that's a great, worthwhile figure in American history, the first openly gay elected official in the United States. My issue is not that. My issue is that, parents are concerned. Kids are very impressionable and they rely, and adults ultimately, have to be careful when being around children, when they're talking 6, 7 years old. Those are very, cognitive, formative years for children, right? I mean, they're learning just reading, writing, arithmetic. I mean, when parents are like, listen, should kids be learning gender identity at 6? They can't even spell the word. Is it also about learning it? Let's break this down a little bit about what parents are outraged about.
Sure. So I find that interesting and I'm glad you said that you were taught that because I have twin daughters. They're 25 now. And having gone through the public school experience with them in the United States, they would argue otherwise because they would argue that they were not taught any of that at a young age. The column that I wrote, the beginning part of it really, I discuss about what actually happened in Berkeley Heights, right? So there was a young man who graduated about 10 years ago that wrote it was an Instagram post actually about how he had dropped out of school because he was bullied because he was gay. And he talked about the fact that it was not just students who were doing that, his peers, but sometimes he felt he'd gotten comments from faculty members and administration. So that was not that long ago. That was 10 years ago. And he dropped out. And his post had over 300 replies. Some of the more, I would say, maybe harder stories, students, chose to DM him, not make it public. But there were over 200 public replies to it, where students, including some of my daughter's friends, came out with their own experiences and talked about it. So this is not something that I'm willing to believe that New Jersey is doing a good job in teaching tolerance, right? Like, I think there definitely is something missing between the curriculum standard and the delivery, or the sort of whatever it is, whether it's the parenting, whether somewhere that message is being lost. And I know that, the Tyler Clementi thing that you mentioned before actually led to, I believe, the HIB laws in New Jersey that are very strong, right? And again, even that is not 100%, what should I say? Not everything about it is great. Like, it's if not 100% effective. Not all of it is good. Some of it is overreach sometimes. Some of it could be handled better. But I think at least there was an attempt to do something. And I think here, I've always talked about, one of the reasons I also, as you probably saw in the article, I ended up serving on the Berkeley Heights, ended up doing a diversity and inclusion task force that I served on. And that was my thing. Like, I wanted it to be about tolerance. I think we need to teach from a very, very young age. And I think this goes into our political discourse as well. Like you said, like, you and I are probably very sort of polar on the political discourse, but we're able to have a conversation. Unfortunately, we see over and over again, like, that's just, whether we talk about the cancel culture, the words that are being used, people are not able to do that anymore. And I think because we need to be able to just tolerate differences, right? Difference of opinion, difference of ethnicity, difference of, people are brought up in different ways, right? Doesn't make one wrong or the other one right. Just understanding that you and I may, we may be able to have a conversation. We may never be friends, but that's just because we're different, and that's fine. We should be able to embrace each other's differences. And unfortunately, I find more and more in my experiences with young students, in what I saw in the Berkeley Heights School District with my own children, that's not just true. One of the other things that really comes to my mind is the anti-Asian hate rallies that took place last year. After the Atlanta incident, there were anti-hate rallies a lot. I think everywhere in New Jersey, pretty much. I know I attended about 5 or 6 of them just in the towns around me. And there was something that I saw was very interesting. I saw this generational sort of divide, especially in the area that I live on the western part of Union County. There are, towns where most of the Asian families here tend to be professionals. Most of them tend to be immigrants. And there's, as we talked about the immigrant experience, one of them is also assimilation, especially when you're talking about Asian, East Asian, South Asian families, and they want to just sort of, keep their head down, do the work, make it better for their kids. Like, that's what they're here for, right? The immigrant experience. So you would have in towns over and over again, I would go and there would be family members saying, yes, we know these things are going on in New York, they're going on in California, somewhere else. Like, in our community here, like, we feel safe. We don't feel like we are under attack. We don't see any anti-bias incidents. And then we would see 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds, their own kids, come up to the mic and talk about, well, yesterday I was standing in the cafeteria line and this is what I was called.
Well, it's unfortunate. Well, listen, it's unfortunate. And I'm glad that, you're out there and, again, standing up for your girls and standing up for your community. And I get that. And folks, if you're just joining us right now, it's 6:14 here on the East Coast. Jersey First brings to you the latest edition of Real Talk here on YouTube as well as on Facebook Live. And joining me this evening is the president of the New Jersey chapter of the National Organization for Women, Anjali Mehrotra, here tonight on the show. I'll get it right, Anjali, I promise. I'm trying really hard, okay? Getting back to your column, another interesting part of it for my audience here at home, you write, to the parents who resist the change, I ask, why is it so important for you to be in control of what your child is learning in school? Are you in control of your students' internet access? Do you know what they are watching on YouTube and TikTok? Or more to the point, are you even aware of what control the parents of your child's friends have on their own access? Because you can be sure that your student is watching whatever their friends are watching. That's a good observation. And listen, as someone who works in higher education, listen, we all know what happens in academia. We know how infested it is with leftists, but it's sort of trickling down into our high schools, elementary schools. And I'm not saying that this is sort of politically oriented, but I think parents sometimes are concerned because we're seeing what happens with teachers that take it upon themselves when it comes to shaping curriculum or teaching things in the classroom. And I get it that, listen, I have plenty of teachers who are friends of mine. I understand the process. You submit a lesson plan, supervisors in a department approve them, school districts look at what curriculum to ratify and things else. I get all that. Sometimes parents are concerned because they know how teachers can be. I know how teachers can be. I work in education. So I think that, you raise a valid point about not so much about, being, or being resistant or having control over their children's lives. I mean, again, you sort of mentioned as well, parents don't seek to control or even question what is appropriate for their students' math or chemistry class. Why? Because they know they are not experts. So what is it about sexuality education that makes parents think that they know better? Well, Anjali, I mean, again, you're right, but I mean, math and chemistry are a little bit different here. 2 + 2 is 4. Regardless of what stupidity we see on Twitter or Instagram by woke activists, or the periodic table is the periodic table. We know what ingredient chemicals are, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, parents are not chemists or mathematicians, but it doesn't mean that they don't have a right to sort of have a say in what goes into their kids' curriculum. Now, again, according to the bill, parents can opt out their children if they don't feel comfortable with what they're learning. But, I'm the only journalist in New Jersey that's standing up for parents. It's not New Jersey Spotlight News. It sure as hell isn't Insider NJ. It's not the Star Ledger. I'm the only one that seems to be like, hey, let parents have their say. It's their property taxes that pay for schools. So if they want to complain or raise concerns, that doesn't make them bigots, Anjali. It doesn't make them homophobes or transphobes. Where am I wrong?
So a couple of things. So the New Jersey standards were actually adopted in, I want to go back, it was 2020, I believe, right? So they were first drafted in 2019. This is the health and physical education standards. And the draft was released in 2019 publicly, right? And then it was the winter of 2019 going into early 2020, before the pandemic, that the State Board of Education actually had open public hearings on it. And I know because I went down to testify in Trenton, right? And then they were adopted. So this is not legislation, number one. This was New Jersey State's, I believe they update the standards. I think it's every 10 years or something like that. And that's what the update was. The only legislation that even remotely was like recent that affected any of this that we're talking about was the legislation to adopt, LGBTQ history into the New Jersey standards and rights of disabilities, people with disabilities. And that's like what you were saying before, like, celebrating somebody like a Harvey Milk, right? Or also learning about the gay rights movement. Like, I think that's important, that just as we teach, whether it's civil rights or we teach women's history, that we should teach, the anti sort of gay, and especially as the AIDS years and what that history did, and how the gay rights activists actually fought against all of that. What's happening in New Jersey right now, like if you actually read the standards could not be more benign. Unfortunately, there is a group that is chosen after the Florida bill to make New Jersey the next case study. And they are finding the most extreme videos that they can find online and saying that this is what is going to be taught in New Jersey. Every school district and every superintendent and their curriculum advisors get to decide what the lesson plan is actually going to look like. If you look at the actual standards, all they talk about is, I actually looked it up. Like when you talk about, say, things like, even like learning about pregnancy from K through 2 till second grade, all they're learning is that all living things can reproduce. Right? Like, so.
Well, I mean, female.
Right. But like plants and, baby animals and all of that, right? Like we're not talking any anything remotely about sex, right? And if you look at the sex part, the sexual health thing, it's really more about, having your safe space and consent. And those are important because I know that there are kids as young as kindergarten, even younger, that are exploited. And most often, honestly, they're exploited because they don't know. I will tell you, it's been in my own personal experience, I was exploited because I did not know. I was probably, I don't even remember what age, 6 or 7 years old. I was standing in a parade ground in a very crowded place in India. And a man took my hand and put it in his pants. And I had no idea what was going on. Okay. So the only reason that he was able to do that, and I did not cry out, I did not say anything, was because I did not know what was going on. So I really do think that is important for young kids to learn, what the body parts are and why they should be able to control their own space, right? Mm-hmm. And that's as simple as and we talk about sexualization, we're not fighting about when a child is learning that this is called a hand, right? Or this is called an eye. Mm-hmm. So why are we so upset if they learn that the right word to use for their wee-wee is a penis? Mm-hmm. That's all it is. We are the ones who are sexualizing it, that are saying that this is somehow different from another body part.
Fair enough, Anjali. But again, when many parents are objecting, and again, I bring up the example that, listen, you raise a good point about maybe sometimes extreme videos are pulled up online, and I get that because it serves a narrative, and I understand all that. But at the end of the day, again, I work in education. I know what teachers are capable of, right? Whether it's about sex education, whether it's about inserting politics. I mean, listen, there are elementary school teachers inserting politics into their curriculum, for God's sakes. And I see it firsthand. I've seen it during election seasons. Again, not to sort of delve away from the topic, but when I see elementary school teachers walking into class with Bernie Sanders shirts, or doing things in class that are sort of evoking political themes, it's like, wait a minute, you're a grown adult and you're walking into a room full of kids with a Bernie Sanders shirt, and you're like, whoa, you're kind of just saying, well, yes, I'm a grown adult and I don't know anything about economics. That's what you're saying to me by wearing a shirt like that, for example. And I'm just being cute here. But the point is that I think a lot of parents can object to perhaps teachers taking it upon themselves. Yes, lesson plans, again, they have to be approved by supervisors. Ultimately, the curriculum has to be approved by the district, and it sort of trickles its way down. Right. But I think parents are still just concerned that, listen, like any profession, teachers can maybe take it upon themselves, be a little too graphic in the classroom, be a little too, unfiltered. And I think that concerns some parents. I think, listen, parents certainly need to do a better job overseeing their children, looking at their internet access, what they're viewing. I get all that. That's a great point you raised in the column, without question. The problem is that, when you raise the point about, why we don't have objections about math or let's say natural sciences like chemistry, well, that's fine because they're sort of fixed and ingrained. When parents are concerned that, curriculum or educators are going to talk about, 30 genders or whatever the hell, whatever the number is today, I don't know, or things that are sort of gravitating along wokeism, that's what they're concerned about, Anjali. And I think that it doesn't make parents, again, bigots or homophobes or transphobes. It just makes them concerned. And I think we have to try to, hopefully, I would say, in this climate that we're living in, be able to talk these things out instead of just being, not saying you, but generically, the impulse to just be emotional about this, I think tends to govern rational thinking a lot of times.
So, I think maybe we live in very different parts of New Jersey, because my experience with, the school system has been very different. I mean, I don't see elementary school students, being taught any kind of politics. That can be a school dress code rule,
Hudson County, right? Hudson County, I've seen it. So, yeah.
The other part of it is, I think I trust teachers a little bit more. And honestly, in most of the schools right now that I'm advocating for it, health is usually taught by gym teachers, right? That's right. I would argue, my kids would argue, that their teachers are probably more uncomfortable talking about this than even they are, sure. Right? And they probably wish that they hadn't gotten more information. One of the things that I mentioned in my column, for example, when I went to that Board of Education meeting virtually in Berkeley Heights, I spoke at it not because I planned on speaking, because I actually heard a student say that they did not learn about, people being gay until 12th grade. 12th grade. And I was like, does anybody think that's a little late? Again,
I'm with
I
you.
think we live in a time where there are families that are not your norm. The reality is that somebody decided a long time ago in society, in this country, what a normal family looks like, and children are bombarded with that message over and over again, whether it's in their books, when they're reading a story about Pat and Molly and their two parents, right? It's most likely a man and a woman. So in order to combat that and make them realize that their friend who has two dads or two moms, that is not something abnormal, right? I think it's okay for kids to learn that families can be different, and all of them are acceptable and all of them are just the same, because all families love each other and care for each other, and all parents, regardless of their gender, are there for their kids. And I think that's what we're talking about. And I think, we forget that so many of the norms that we live in, gender stereotypes. You talked about the thing that I talked about, my daughter was one of those who did not like to wear dresses or wear makeup, I remember that it was, we went to a party where there was a Secret Santa, right? And somebody gave her a Barbie. And she was super, super upset that how could Santa not know that she does not like dolls?
Okay.
So we have become all of these gender norms and stereotypes. We have to understand that this is the real indoctrination, and this country has become so used to it, has become so accepted that anything other than that is literally considered not normal. Like, it's very easy for somebody to say, this is what a normal family looks like. And I think that's all this curriculum seeks to do. That's what the advocates want to do. They want to be inclusive and show children and the next generation that all of these things are normal. So whether it's having two parents of different races, that's also normal.
Yeah.
Having one parent, that's also normal. So I think all of those, especially, or maybe you're, adopted from a different country and you look nothing like your parents, like all of those things are normal. And I think it's just a way to be more inclusive.
Fair points. Fair points. Folks, it's 6:27 here on the East Coast. Joining me live here tonight on Real Talk, she is the president of the New Jersey chapter of the National Organization for Women. Anjali Mehrotra here joins us on Real Talk. Anjali, let me pick your brain for a minute here politically. I know, obviously, the National Organization for Women is a pretty politically active organization, whether nationally or statewide. And obviously, it's 2022 and the midterms are coming. And if anything we learned last November, whether it was 5 hours south on Route 95 in Virginia, or even here in New Jersey, it seems like it could be a tsunami of blood for one party coming this November. We saw a little bit what was going on in Virginia. We saw that there were pockets. First, for the record, I was the only journalist in New Jersey that called the race close here in the gubernatorial race. Everyone thought I was crazy. Everyone said, oh, look at the polling. I don't trust Monmouth or any of these polling apparatuses. I trust them as much as I trust the Mets to win a World Series, okay? That's how much I trust them, okay? Now, I said the governor, because there are a million more registered Democrats, the county machines per se, not the apparatuses, but the political parties, tend to mobilize better, get the vote out. And I think that because of those factors, the governor's going to get reelected by 2 or 3 points. Everyone thought I was crazy. I said, no, people are not happy with the governor. There are pockets of the state that the governor's widely unpopular in, and it showed last November. We saw 5 Republican women join the assembly. We saw arguably one of the most visible state Senate seats flip red. And obviously the governor just narrowly won re-election. And it seems like that's a message that's going out. We saw it in Virginia, right? We saw that, hey, when the state wants to tell parents what to do with their children, that's going to galvanize parents. I'm sure it's a message that's going to galvanize this year as well. I mean, aside from just inflation, gas prices, a president that's cognitively declining every second of the day. I mean, these are things that put Democrats in a really vulnerable position to where it could be almost a horror movie come November. Where do you think Democrats, for example, up here in Hudson County, it's as blue as Windex. Next door in Bergen County, it's pretty blue. Rob Menendez Jr. will win his House seat, 16. I'll be serious. Josh Gottheimer will win. I'm sure Bill Pascal will win. But when you get to Central and South Jersey, it seems like Democrats are a little vulnerable there. It seems like if you can harp on that message about how bad it is at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and what Democrats are doing nationally, I think that's something that if you're a smart Republican, you can galvanize that message in New Jersey. Your thoughts about how it looks for the midterms?
So I'm not going to speak about other districts. I'm going to speak about my district, right? So I live in a congressional district 7, which actually is a pretty sort of considered one of the districts to watch, right? So having lived in this district, which for the most part was red, right, for most of the time that I've lived here, and only it was in 2018, right, that we flipped it. And what we saw was the energy that came after the 2016 election. And it, in most of the country, it's definitely in New Jersey, it was women, right? It was suburban women that got activated after the Trump election, and really sort of, went very, very sort of grassroots, door to door, all of that.
The Women's
right?
March, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what got, Tom Malinowski elected to the House. He's up for re-election. And one of the issues that you didn't talk about that we talk a lot about it now is things like voting rights or even abortion, right? So legalizing abortion, which, most women do count on for a variety of reasons, has been legal in this country since 1972. We're waiting to see what will happen in the Supreme Court, right, at a national level. And I think whatever happens in June, I think could be also a big factor in the November elections. So if we see the Supreme Court either weaken Roe or strike down Roe, I think that's going to galvanize women throughout the country. Mm-hmm. So I'm not making any predictions. Mm-hmm. But I think that energy I know CD7 is not gone. And I think there's a chance that that's going to spread. So, but I will tell you, Fernando, I'm with you on the polls. I think after 2016, I don't believe any poll out there. So,
well, again, and you brought up some interesting points here because, when it comes to issues that galvanize different voter demographics, right? Listen, I'm not trying to sound cynical here, but abortion's been legal since 1972. We've had conservative Supreme Court majorities in the past. It's never been touched. I argue this just tends to be a scare tactic. It's election season. I think abortion will be fine. I don't think it's going anywhere. And this is something I always talk about too, because it seems that like, whether it's in New Jersey or other states, like we worry so much about what goes on in other states. Case in point, like, whatever states, I'm a history professor. Every time I teach the Bill of Rights, I always remind my students, the 10th Amendment, states' rights, federalism. As far as I'm concerned, listen, whatever Mississippi and Alabama want to do, that's their business. That's what federalism is for. I don't think they care down in Florida or in Mississippi anymore that we cater to illegals here in New Jersey than we should be worried about what they do. So listen, whether it's the great freedom-loving state of Texas or the great freedom-loving state of Florida or Alabama, whatever they choose to do, Anjali, that's their business. I'm not going to have a meltdown about it. Just like they don't have a meltdown about us giving driver's licenses to illegals or giving money to illegals in New Jersey. Like, listen, that's their states. Let them govern the way they want. As I tell people, if you're a feminist in New Jersey, not you, I mean generically, but if you're a feminist in New Jersey and you're worried about an abortion line in Alabama, no offense, ladies out there, you don't live in Alabama. Don't worry about it. Like at the federal level in the courts, it hasn't changed for decades. We've had other conservative majorities. I don't see that changing. I just look at it as a scare tactic to just whip up hysteria. At the end of the day, like, I don't live in Texas. I don't got to worry about it. Or, I don't live in Alabama.
Right. And all of those laws actually, so most of them, other than the Texas one, actually don't come into play until the Supreme Court basically decides, the Mississippi case that is up, we're supposed to get a decision in June. But that will change things, and it will change things. Even in New Jersey, we expect some of it to change. Luckily, we did pass the New Jersey Reproductive. I think it was eventually called the Reproductive Freedom of Choice Act. So we are protected in New Jersey, but without that, we would not have been. So I think we'll wait to see. I think November is really far. I think every congressional district is going to be different. And I think there's so many issues. You name some, I name some, and I'm sure there's more out there that voters care about that we probably didn't even bring up that are going to shape these elections.
No, it certainly will. And again, if we learned anything from last November, obviously the gubernatorial race in Virginia was very telling. I think you saw some districts in New Jersey where, again, the governor is very, very left. The governor is very, very progressive. I mean, if you want to call it that. I mean, he's very left. And I think people in New Jersey were just upset with him. And I think people were upset about the way that the state's being governed, right? I mean, again, this is not a controversial topic. I think we're seeing the proof is in the pudding. In the freedom-loving state of Texas and Florida, guess what? They got COVID right. Here in New Jersey and New York and in Connecticut, well, blue states, we all know how they handle COVID. We saw the difference in Florida and Texas. Economies continue to boom. It is what it is. I think people got tired of that. And I think carrying over to 2022, historically, certainly in 2002 under President George W. Bush, Republicans actually held the House and added seats. And in 1934 under FDR, Democrats held the House and added seats too. But for the most part, during midterms, the opposing party tends to win the House and maybe at times the Senate. I'm with you. I don't always trust polls, but I would argue, Anjali, that Democrats are not putting themselves in a good position here because listen, if you, and when I say you, I don't mean you, I mean it's generically, but if you want to die on a hill about pronouns and 30 genders and blaming a guy who's 3,000 miles away for why gas prices are what they are inflation. Well, we all know it's the president's own doing. It's the president's own policies that are creating this crunch for Americans. If Democrats want to die on that hill, again, be my guest. I'd love to make sure that I don't hear the words Speaker Pelosi anymore in January. But I think Republicans have to be smart about this. The problems are evident. It just seems that for whatever reason, Democrats can't get out of their own way because they're focusing on the wrong things. Where am I wrong?
So honestly, I don't speak for the Democratic Party. And now, we are a bipartisan, actually a nonpartisan organization. I can only speak about, women's issues. I can talk about the things that we care about. So whether it's, pay equity, all the issues, we know that there are issues that you probably don't even think of, as women's issues, right? So it's not just things like childcare and ending gender-based violence, but when you're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about food insecurity, we're talking about, just access to basic affordable health care. These are all issues that affect women disproportionately. So those are the issues that we work on. Those are the issues that we care about. And unfortunately, we've seen over and over again that there are certain states, there are certain politicians that are willing to work with us on those issues. And anybody who's willing to work with us, we will work with. So we don't, from a national perspective, I also sit on a national board. We work in states that are red. We work with those legislators to pass bills. One of the issues that I'm working on in New Jersey, for example, is, to put menstrual products for free in school bathrooms, because we know that there are just too many students who are missing school because they don't have access to the products for a variety of reasons, right? And this is not something that is groundbreaking in New Jersey. There's 16 states that have already passed that. And you can imagine if the number is 16, it's not just blue states, it's red states as well. So those are the things that I'm interested in. Those are the issues that we care about, that we're working on. And I think one of the best things that I've learned with now, having, being part of an organization that has been around for more than 50 years, politicians, congressional members, presidents come and go, right? Yeah. And we've had waves where we've had, really sort of, a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, and right, and then gone to the Republican, and right. And through it all, we've learned that we just have to keep moving the needle forward by advocating and fighting for our issues through our grassroots movements. And every time I meet one of my members that has been through the movement, for the last 50 years, and still fighting, right? That's what reminds me that this is not something that you get done in a year or 2 years sometimes. Sometimes it takes 10 years. Sometimes we're still fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment, 50 years later. I have members in New Jersey that went into the marches in 70s, So I think all of this is, to me, it's like a lot of noise sometimes, right? Let's keep our eyes on the prize. Let's keep moving the needle forward, regardless of, what's going on in the political world.
Fair enough. Back to women's rights for a moment, because I know we talked off the air about it, but Anjali, as you can tell behind me, I'm a big sports fan. I don't hide that. And I am a guy that loves sports and loves sort of the sanctity of sports, or the purity of it, where it's, let's make sure it's done down the middle, as they say. And listen, I'm always mystified when I see this in the news headlines, and we've seen it recently. And listen, I don't have any children that I know of, but if I did have a daughter, I mean, I would certainly want her to play sports because I'm a sports nut. But I'll say this, and I'm really curious about it, because I don't see enough feminists sort of speaking out about this, or sort of making noise, where if I had a daughter, right, whether she's swimming, whether she's playing basketball, just case in point, if I had a daughter playing high school basketball and she's a junior, and, she leads the county in scoring, right, the school district in scoring, and the following year she's a senior. And of course, she's about to graduate high school, maybe getting offers for scholarships. Who knows? Maybe, God willing. The point is that, a boy comes along who now wants to identify as a girl, takes down her records, beats her in scoring. I'd be pissed. I'd be going to the school and saying, how are you allowing this? How is this fair to our biological girls? But for some reason, I don't see an outcry from a lot of feminists or women's rights where, like, wait a minute, they should be standing up for biological girls, and they're not on a national level. And that kind of mystifies me, because again, whether it's basketball, we saw the issue in swimming, I think in Pennsylvania, like some of the swimmers' teammates were afraid to speak out because they might be viewed as a bigot or a homophobe. It's not a bigot or homophobe or transphobe to say, hey, listen, let biological girls play their sports. The fact of boys now playing with biological girls, and in some cases surpassing them, that's really unfair to girls. That's really unfair to our daughters out there. And I'm the only one speaking out about it in New Jersey, for example.
So one of the things, so let's call it what you're calling, what you're not calling it. What you're talking about is trans rights, right? Because the reality is that ever since Title IX was passed, any school could have girls playing on a boys' team and boys playing on a girls' team. And it has happened in the past, right? Depending on what the sport is. If they don't have a team for one sport, I know that even in my daughter's high school and middle school, actually, I think it was middle school, one of my daughter's friends played on the boys basketball team, So depending on,
was it co-ed though, Anjali?
It was a boys basketball travel team. There was no girls team, so she played on the boys team.
Okay. Now, just curious, did she identify as a boy?
No.
Okay. All right.
Nope.
So you know where I'm going.
But my point is that because she did not identify as a boy, no one raised a problem, right? No one raised a question. Nobody had an issue. So this is something that Title IX allowed, right, to give equal opportunity to students. Now, just because we're putting the word that somebody's identifying as a different sex, all of a sudden it's become like this outrageous thing. So, and I would argue like these, again, they're gender stereotypes, they're gender, I wouldn't even call, they're just stereotypes that are being passed down. As I said to you before, like, does anybody really think that, somebody like Serena Williams cannot beat most, male tennis players? Like I thought we settled this. We had the battle of the sexes, right? This idea that women are somehow weaker than men on a team, so that a boy on a team is all of a sudden going to threaten their ability to perform or to win. I don't buy that. You know, and I don't think most feminists do.
Is it fair? I mean, again, whether it's the example I brought up of, let's say, a boy playing, listen, we can talk about biology all we want on another show, but at the end of the day, you can take all the hormone suppressors you want. At the end of the day, there's a density in bone and muscle mass that even if it's a slight advantage for a boy, that's still not an even playing field for girls. And it's just so unfair to them.
But we have slight advantages based on height and weight and everything all the time, right? So does a taller girl not have a advantage on a basketball court? Like I mean, there is this outrage now just because that's what you've chosen as sort of the outrage of the day. Mm-hmm. You know, we have, you know, body type differences. We have, you know, I would argue that, you know, 40, 50 years ago, somebody would have said, you know, we don't want Black athletes because their performance is superior. And so they have an advantage on the court. So we don't want them on the same team. The idea that whether it is genetics, whether it is, you know, your gender, whatever, we just need to recognize that there all are differences. And if you want to be inclusive, if you truly come to it from a point of being inclusive, there's no reason for the outrage.
So just to be clear, I mean, again, whether it's that example of the swimmer, right? I mean, because we're talking about like now a fully grown man. It's not like some child that we're still going through puberty or adolescence or harm. I mean, we're talking about, let's say, again, that's an example we've seen in other parts of the country. A grown man. I mean, when you're 21 years old, you're a grown man. I mean, physically.
I understand. But my point again is that body differences, whether you talk about muscle mass because somebody has been exercising more or, you know, eating right. When you talk about things like height, which is really very largely genetic based, like all of those give advantages and disadvantages in sports, right? And we don't complain about that if they're from the same gender. So why is it all of a sudden just because it's a different gender that we need to be outraged? I don't buy that.
I would just argue that, you know, when it comes to, again, I'm the only one really in New Jersey media standing up for biological girls in sports. And I just want them to get
I mean, can I just say, like, we don't need that. We don't need you. We don't need you to stand up for us. We can speak for ourselves.
No, that's fair, Anjali. But the problem is that feminists aren't standing up for women. And isn't that a woman?
We are standing up for women. We are standing up for women. Women don't believe that we are weaker. We're not. That's it. Okay. Period.
Okay. But again, it's not about, I'm not calling anybody weaker. I'm just talking about an even playing field. It is
an even playing field, especially in athletics. I think anybody who goes into it understands that you are always going to be playing. You know, I've seen students, I have friends' children who are very, very passionate about basketball, right? And they were fantastic when they were in elementary school and middle school, right? And all of a sudden they got to high school and they were the shortest person on the team and they couldn't compete anymore. Who are you going to blame that on?
Well, again, Anjali, that's a fair point about height differentials. But when we're talking about body frames and, you know, muscle mass and bone density, that can
again, those are also genetic to a large extent, right? Like if you are in a family that's big boned, right? Like, I mean, you could be, two girls could look very different on the same team.
No, sure. But just to be clear, is it more of a trans rights issue than it is a women's rights issue when it comes to this sort of debate?
I think it's an inclusion issue. I think all of this comes down to we want to allow people to identify as they want, to live their lives the way they want, without forcing them into gender stereotypes that are largely societal created. You know, I come from a country, honestly, that actually recognizes a third gender legally.
Okay.
So this whole idea of binary, we need to understand it's a social construct in the Western world. You know, and India has a very, very rich history of recognizing a third gender. And for the most part, it was really during the colonial times when, you know, colonial norms and the Western norms were forced on India that we went away from that. But since 2014, that country has legally, the Supreme Court of that country has legally recognized a third gender. So have they in Bangladesh and Nepal and Pakistan. So most of that part of the world, even Thailand, recognizes a third gender. So to understand that this is not about, biology is not the binary construct that we think it is in the West, because even the science tells you that it's not that straightforward. It's not that clear. It's not that black and white. There's a lot of gray in between. I think we just want to be inclusive of that.
All right. Well, listen, that's a very interesting outlook, and I'm sure our audience is going to have a lot to say. Folks, keep the comments coming here on StreamYard and also on YouTube as well. Anjali, before I let you go, I want to thank you for a very lively and I think a very civil discourse. I think that's good that, again, we're going to see very little eye to eye ideologically, I'm sure, and policy-wise, but it's good to be able to have a conversation where people from different sides of the aisle can come together and be adults and not scream over each other and not resort to name calling. I think that these are productive conversations that I think we need to continue having. So I appreciate your time coming on here. And folks, certainly these are the exclusives you'll see every week on Real Talk with Fernando Uribe, because no one else in New Jersey is really doing this. So I appreciate your time. I certainly want to thank you for your candor, and I'll give you the last word here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I really do appreciate it. And I agree with you. I think we need to be able to have these conversations, right? I'm one of those people that, even though I definitely identify as a progressive, I'm probably not as left as you think. And again, based on my immigrant roots, right, recognizing that I'm very practical. So I kind of think of myself as a practical progressive. So I think you and I probably have more in common than we realize even today. But I think it's always good to keep the conversation going. So thank you for having me.
I appreciate that. Listen, I appreciate the kind words, and certainly, listen, it might piss off some of your liberal friends, but tell everybody you know how much you love Real Talk with Fernando Uribe, and I look forward to having you back on later this summer, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Folks, she is Anjali Mehrotra, the president of the New Jersey chapter of the National Organization for Women. Definitely someone to keep an eye out for as election season heats up, and of course, just community issues heat up in New Jersey as well. Anjali, God bless you. Stay healthy. And thank you for joining us here on Real Talk via Jersey First.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Take care. Folks, great episode here tonight. Again, listen, these are the conversations that I take pride in having with guests from different sides of the aisle politically. And certainly this week is, again, no exception. Once again, a thank you goes out to Anjali Mehrotra for her time here on the show. Folks, let me finish here before I close out this week with, again, what I've been doing, and I've got a lot of positive feedback, and of course, the traffic is reflective of it. People like my closing monologues, and certainly, as I talked about for the last few weeks, I have decided to anoint myself sort of the unofficial watchdog calling out bad journalism in New Jersey. Now, I know for the last few weeks, I've taken some shots at Insider NJ, specifically its editor-in-chief, Maxi Pizarro, or its resident insufferable human, little Jay Lassiter, for what I call examples of bad journalism. And folks, and it's not subjective. Everything I called out was fact. They may not like it. And again, I'm still waiting for a response, but I doubt they will. Again, it's that 4-syllable word, that they struggle with: integrity. Yeah, they want to come on the show and dispute anything I said. Hey, doors open. I welcome you with open arms. But I seriously doubt you'll find anything that I said to be factually inaccurate, because that's not what I do on this show, folks. Fernando's all about facts, and facts are all about Fernando. Now, let me call out this week's winner of bad journalism, and that's Tommy Moran from the Star Ledger, the newspaper here in New Jersey, in conjunction with NJ.com, who continues to lose circulation and subscribers almost daily. It's almost funny when I open my email, folks, and you see those little advertisements from NJ.com. Oh, please support journalism. Yeah, I'll support good journalism, but not yours, obviously, NJ.com or the Star Ledger. When you start practicing good journalism, maybe I'll want to spend $1 and subscribe to you. But in the meantime, if you keep putting up garbage journalism, I'm not going to support it, and I'm going to call it out. So, of course, Tommy Moran can be insufferable. And in his latest column last week, he titled it, "Trump Isn't the Only Danger to Democracy." Yes, because we know that Tom Moran lives with a perpetual hard-on when it comes to his dislike for the 45th president, Donald Trump. Here's some interesting excerpts from the article. One of the great things about New Jersey is that it is not Florida. Yeah, Tom, because the great weather and the way it was governed during COVID, just like Texas, they got it right, unlike New Jersey and New York and Pennsylvania and Connecticut. But Tommy Boy won't tell you that because Tommy Boy wants to, again, virtue signal like everybody else does in New Jersey media, right? Uncle Dave with NJTV, Maxi Pizarro, little JJ, just another virtue signaler in New Jersey media, folks, here that we have in Tommy Moran. So he writes, so we don't have to spend much time thinking about Governor Ron DeSantis, a bully whose latest gambit is to target gay and transgender kids for political gain. No, Tommy, that's not what's going on in Florida, okay? You may want to make it out that way for whatever, 65 subscribers that NJ.com has, or maybe that they have left, but that's not what's going on in Florida, by the way. But if you're feeling strong, please take a moment to cast your gaze southward and hear the unnerving story of his confrontation with the Walt Disney Company. Because DeSantis is the second most popular Republican in the country behind Donald Trump. So it's time to start paying attention. So the story begins with DeSantis signing a new law that banned discussion of sexual orientation and gender issues in schools from kindergarten through third grade and gave parents the right to school districts to enforce it at the expense of the districts. It's an obnoxious piece of mischief. But since Florida already outlaws sex education until fifth grade, it probably won't change much in the classroom. Now, of course, Tommy Boy, again, with his insufferable virtue signaling, says this stunt is all about feeding meat to the GOP's angry base, which is how DeSantis makes his living. No, that's not true, Tommy. He's standing up for parents. He's standing up for people that elected him into office, right? Whether the issue is immigration, climate, racism, COVID, or a kid confused about gender, DeSantis can be trusted to degrade this discussion with combative rhetoric that villainizes those who disagree with him. In this poisonous age, he fits in just right. That's pretty rich, Tommy. You talking about like poison in the poisonous age when you yourself contribute to the poison. I read your columns, so believe me, have a little self-awareness, bro. So, of course, he goes on to write, but this story gets worse and speaks to an authoritarian impulse in DeSantis that is downright scary. He's now using the machinery of state government to persecute political opponents, crossing a bright line that should alarm genuine conservatives as much as it does liberals. Folks, this is what bothers me about people like Tommy Boy and other journalists in New Jersey that cry about authoritarianism and fascism. Tommy, newsflash, bro, you've never lived in an authoritarian government or under an authoritarian government. You've never lived in a fascist state. Folks, this is what people on the left get a perpetual erection about. It's like they get hard every single day of the week talking about, oh, this is authoritarianism. You've never lived under it. Have you ever traveled outside this country? Because I have. I've visited countries, okay, abroad in Latin America and outwards as well, where authoritarianism actually does exist. But folks, this is a problem with people like Tommy Boy and other journalists, okay? They get a hard-on for whatever reason about, well, this is authority. You don't know the first thing about what authoritarianism is, Tom. You've never lived under it. What you think is authoritarianism is very different than the textbook definition. But Tommy Boy won't tell you that, right? Because Tommy Boy is also one of those leftists that I'm sure bitches and moans about the fact that, oh, we have to keep corporations accountable. We have to hold the rich and powerful accountable. We have to hold companies like Amazon and Walmart and Target and Tesla. We have to keep them in check because, you know what? Corporations are too powerful. We have to hold them, accountable. So, you know what? How about those corporations paying their fair share, right? Don't we hear Tommy Boy and other leftists in New Jersey media, even national media, talk about that? Oh, well, guess what, Tommy? When Ron DeSantis decides to hold the Disney Corporation accountable, you should be blown a load on yourself. Your pants should be drenched because of how happy you are that he's holding a corporation accountable. But guess what, Tom? That requires self-awareness. Again, Tom, just like Maxi Pizarro, just like Uncle Dave, just like Jay Lassiter. Again, it's that pesky, it's that annoying 4-syllable word, integrity. Bro, look it up in the dictionary. It's not that difficult, okay? Because you're lacking it, because you're not consistent. If you want to be all about corporations being held accountable, well, that's what Governor DeSantis is doing. Why aren't you happy? Why aren't you blowing a load in your pants? About, oh, someone's finally holding a corporation accountable. But because it's not what you like, oh, he's a bully, he's authoritarian. Tom, you don't know the first thing about living under authoritarianism. Okay? If you've traveled outside this country, maybe you have, and maybe you've seen it, but you've never lived under it. So to throw the word around just to get your you-know-what hard is disingenuous. But let me continue here with this latest garbage column. Then, of course, here, let's go to this one. So if you, this is a great one by Tommy. So if you love democracy, if you treasure the sacred right to speak your mind freely, then be careful of DeSantis. In a straw poll at this year's Conservative Political Action Committee convention in Washington, actually, I'm sorry, in Orlando, Trump won 59%, but DeSantis won 28%, which when Trump's name was removed, DeSantis nominated was 61%. DeSantis believes the 2020 election was a fraud and recently moved to form a special state police force dedicated to investigating the imaginary surge of electoral fraud in America. Oh, you mean like that Truth Commission or committee that President Joe Biden's creating now? How come you're not having an attack about that, Tommy? Oh, he just rewrote the state's congressional map to give Republicans an obscene 20-8 advantage in an evenly divided state and to eliminate 2 black-held seats. His attacks on Disney's right to free speech only sharpen the concern that he's a danger to democracy who doesn't belong within a mile of the Oval Office. Tom, listen, let me tell you something. Okay, you want to talk about, oh, Disney's free speech rights, but I thought corporations didn't have free speech. I thought they're a private entity, so they can do what they want, and they can't be held accountable, right? Aren't you always about holding corporations accountable? Be consistent, bro, okay? Either be consistent or get out of the way. Let real journalists like yours truly maybe have a discussion about the narrative, okay? But here you are, again, fixated on Trump. Again, you must live in this bubble in the People's Republic of Montclair, right? When you're going to Starbucks and you can't decide whether to have, a macchiato or a cappuccino, or you can't decide whether to have soy milk or almond milk or skim milk. Again, you're one of those white woke people in Montclair. Yes, I can say that. Okay, that it needs to find something to bitch and moan about when it comes to conservatives, supposedly. But you don't hold anything accountable. You know what's really funny? That people like you will even have the audacity to say, well, the 45th president maybe shows signs of cognitive decline. Maybe he's not competent. Hello? Are you watching the 46th president? This guy is cognitively declining by the minute. But nowhere in Tom Moran's columns will you hear Tommy Boy talk about that. Or again, holding corporations accountable. It's when it suits him, okay? He'll blow a load again all over himself about, oh, you know what? This is authoritarianism. No, it's not, Tommy. It's not. What's going on in Florida, in the freedom-loving state of Florida, just like in the great freedom-loving state of Texas, aside from getting it right on COVID, aside from getting it right on states' rights and everything else, you can't stand that because you'd rather continue living in New Jersey, right? Well, we all know it's poorly governed because one side of the aisle dominates the narrative here with poor fiscal policies. It's why we have the highest property taxes in the country. It's why we continue to spend irresponsibly and we fixate on dumbass stuff, okay? I don't care about pronouns. Call me whatever you want. That's not important to me. I don't care about 30 genders. I don't care about catering to illegals like you do, okay? I care about the state being more affordable. I care about filling up my gas tank and not costing me the potential of donating a kidney, okay? Or going food shopping. Because while I live comfortably on an income that I feel very good with, not everyone's the same. Not everyone's fortunate, okay? There are single parents out there still struggling. But of course, you don't want to write about that. You want to write about authoritarianism, okay? You want to talk about calling Ron DeSantis an authoritarian or a fascist. No, Tommy, that's not what's going on, okay? I get it. You live with this perpetual erection about calling out the right. Why don't you have some self-awareness and call out the left? Maybe you'll get more subscribers. Maybe NJ.com, that's absolute garbage and it's trash, might get more subscribers if you were a little more intellectually honest. Oh, my bad. That requires you, again, to have that 4-syllable word. You know what it is? Integrity. I'm telling you, why is it such a difficult word to understand? It's one of the easiest words in the dictionary to pronounce. And it's one of the easiest words in the dictionary to understand what it means. But for whatever reason, the liberal media establishment in New Jersey, like Tommy Boy, like Little JJ, like Maxie with Insider NJ, with Uncle Dave with NJTV, you guys live, the Lollipop Guild, and again, Tommy Boy is a part of it, loves to virtue signal. You love to create hysteria out of nothing. But you know what? Why don't you have a little more integrity? Again, that pesky four-syllable word, and talk about what's really wrong right now. The fact that you don't like the way Ron DeSantis governs, that's your opinion. That's your right to disagree. But be consistent philosophically and intellectually. Because again, you're always about holding corporations accountable. Well, that's what he's doing with Disney. But because you don't like what he's doing it under, or whatever, parameters he's doing it under, that's why you're having a hissy fit. Okay? Tommy, you got to be consistent, bro. Okay? And that's something that you struggle with. And again, I have to call you out again on bad journalism. So this week's winner of bad journalism is Tommy Boy, Tom Moran from the Star-Ledger. And again, folks, whenever you get that email in your inbox about NJ.com saying, oh, please support journalism. Yeah, you know what? I'll support journalism when it's good. But when it's garbage journalism, and I'll say it again, trash. Because NJ.com, you're trash. You're garbage, okay? It's not worth the paper it's printed on when you read the Star-Ledger, and it's not worth using my data on my cell phone, on my laptop, on my Mac, or my tablet to read the garbage that comes out of NJ.com. They're more worried about, I don't know, having the top 10 burritos or tacos in New Jersey. Yeah, that's what NJ.com is worried about. Or, again, enabling garbage journalism like this with Tom Moran. Tommy, like I've said to other journalists as well, I'm calling you guys out every single week until you have, what's called a spine, or, those male reproductive organs down there. If you have them, come on the show and we'll have a discussion. But the problem is, folks, that those on the left in New Jersey media won't do that. They're too busy virtue signaling. They're too busy smoking weed. They're too busy, having blowing a load on themselves about their New York Mets doing well in April, or, Maxi Pizarro talking about the West Ward race in Newark, when we all know Newark's a dump. It's going to keep being a dump. And Tommy Boy is only adding to this ineptitude when it comes to New Jersey media. Guys, get your act together. Okay? I'm like half your age, and I know what I'm doing. Why don't you guys? And that's our show for this week. Once again, I want to thank Anjali Mehrotra, the president of the New Jersey chapter for the National Organization for Women, for joining us here this week on Real Talk. You can check out New Jersey's up-and-coming news site here and great source of information, Jersey First, at www.jerseyfirst.org. That's www.jersey1st.org. Make sure you like Jersey First on Facebook. And, of course, make sure you follow it on both Instagram and Twitter. Check out my own Twitter as well, folks, at NoFilterUribe. Kind of seeing more followers now ever since Elon Musk bought Twitter, thank the Lord. Talk about some consistency, when it comes to the big tech corporations, right? Don't we want accountability? Well, there you go. Well, again, follow me there. And also follow me on Instagram at The Amazing Professor. And also check out Real Talk on Facebook as well. And always remember, ladies and gentlemen, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, it's always Real Talk right here via Jersey First. I am New Jersey's premier award-winning journalist, top 100 Latino via the Latino Spirit Online magazine for 2020, 2021, and now in 2022. And of course, your favorite conservative, once again, it's me, Fernando Uribe, saying so long, folks. Have a great Cinco de Mayo. Be safe, party responsibly, and I'll see you next week here live at 6 p.m. Eastern Time as Nicholas Luciano, the founder of Safely Out, one of the preeminent domestic violence organizations in the state, will join me for what will be a very lively conversation about domestic violence awareness and much more. Once again, next Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Jersey First, via Facebook, on StreamYard, and also on YouTube. Folks, have a great rest of your week. And I'll see you next week here, once again, for Real Talk with Fernando Uribe. Have a great week, ladies and gentlemen.